After my husband's funeral, my son drove me to a lonely road and said, "This is where you get out. The house and business are mine now." I stood in the dust, clutching my bag as he drove off without looking back. No phone. No money. That's when I realized I wasn't alone, I was free. But he had no idea what I'd done before his father died. They didn't just bury my husband that day. They tried to bury me with him, hoping to erase decades of our life's work. My own children, the ones I'd raised, stood over Nicholas's fresh grave plotting to steal everything we had, but they had no idea who they were truly dealing with. You see, I was born Naomi Marie Blackwood, then became Naomi Canton when I married Nicholas in '81. I was that woman until just 3 weeks ago, the day after we laid him to rest. I'm 68 now, with hands gnarled by arthritis, yet they still remember the rhythm of kneading sourdough for my son Brandon's Sunday morning treat, and the soft feel of my daughter Melissa's hair as I braided it for elementary school. I tell you this because you need to understand, before everything shattered, I was just a mother who believed she had raised good children. Nicholas's pancreatic cancer took 14 agonizing months to kill him. It's a silent executioner, that one, giving you just enough time to put your affairs in order, but never enough to truly live with the knowledge. At first, we kept it between us. Our kids were busy. Brandon, consumed by his financial consulting career in Boston, seemed to miss every major holiday. And Melissa? Her perpetually failing wellness businesses in Denver always needed another investment from her dad. They don't need this burden yet. Nicholas had slurred one evening, staring at the ceiling, the morphine dulling his pain but not his love. Let them live their lives a little longer without the shadow. I nodded, because I loved him. But deep down, I knew better. I knew our children. When they finally arrived at our modest farmhouse on the outskirts of Millfield, Pennsylvania, the same house where they'd grown up, where Nicholas and I had painstakingly built Canton family orchards from 20 neglected apple trees into one of the most respected organic fruit operations in the state, they didn't come with comfort. They came with questions about the will. "Mom, I'm just trying to be practical," Brandon said, his voice taking on that condescending edge he'd perfected somewhere around his first six-figure bonus. We were at the kitchen table, Nicholas asleep upstairs, when he first brought it up. "The medical bills must be piling up. Have you two considered downsizing? The business can't be easy for you to manage alone." Brandon had left Millfield at 18, declaring small-town Pennsylvania as suffocating as the very soil that had paid for his education. He only visited when absolutely necessary, usually preferring a hotel to his childhood bedroom because the country air aggravates my sinuses. But suddenly, in his father's final weeks, he developed a profound interest in the family business that had embarrassed him throughout his adolescence. Melissa arrived 3 days later, bringing 6 suitcases and the unmistakable scent of expensive failure. 5 wellness ventures in 8 years, each launched with her father's money, each abandoned the moment it required actual work. But she hugged Nicholas with genuine tears and even slept beside his bed the night before he passed. That's why I still struggle with what came next. The funeral was small, just as Nicholas would have wanted. He was buried on a hillside overlooking the orchards, where the spring blossoms were just beginning to show. I stood between my children as they lowered him into the ground. Brandon's arms stiff around my shoulders, Melissa openly weeping into a monogrammed handkerchief I'd never seen before. "He's at peace now," the pastor said. And I wondered if that was true, or just something people say after someone dies from long suffering. Nicholas and I weren't religious, but we'd maintained enough social convention of occasional church attendance that Pastor Williams knew to focus on Nicholas's love for the land, not any heavenly reward. What I remember most about that day was the silence afterwards. The house echoed with it as people dropped off casseroles and spoke in hushed tones about Nicholas's kindness, his integrity. How he'd helped Mr. Peterson save his dairy farm during the recession, or employed the Wilson boys when they needed summer work. Nobody mentioned how he'd built our business from nothing, while raising 2 children who seemed to have inherited none of his values. I made up the guest rooms, I told Brandon and Melissa that evening, after the last visitors left. "I thought we could spend tomorrow going through some of your father's things together." About that, Mom, Brandon said, setting down his whiskey glass with a precision that reminded me unsettlingly of his father. Melissa and I have been talking, and we think it's best if we settle things quickly. We both need to get back. Settle things. The estate? Melissa clarified, scrolling through her phone. The house, the business. Brandon and I need to figure out the next steps. I'd expected grief from my children. Perhaps a desire to reminisce about their father. What I got instead was a boardroom meeting. Brandon opened his laptop on the dining table where we'd celebrated their birthdays, their graduations, their departures. Dad spoke to me about this last year, he said, not meeting my eyes. He was worried about you managing alone. The business needs modernization, investment. The house is too much for someone your age. My age. I repeated, the words tasting bitter. I've managed this orchard alongside your father for 40 years. And you've done wonderfully, Melissa chimed in, using the same saccharine voice she used when selling overpriced vitamins to desperate women. But it's time to think about your future, Mom. A retirement community would give you friends, activities. I have friends. I have activities. My voice sounded distant, even to my own ears. This is my home. It's all of our home, Brandon corrected. And Dad left the business to Melissa and me in the will. He wanted us to take care of you, but he knew the business needed younger management. I stared at my son, this stranger in expensive clothes, who thought he knew anything about the earth that had fed him. The trees his father had nursed through drought, blight, and frost. Show me the will. He slid a document across the table. Not our family lawyer's letterhead, but something printed on Brandon's corporate stationery. Nicholas's signature looked wrong somehow. Too perfect, too steady for a man whose hands had trembled with pain for months. You had him sign this while he was on morphine. The rage that rose in me then was primal, something I hadn't felt since I watched a fox try to steal into our chicken coop when the children were small. I'd chased it off with a broom and the kind of fury that comes from protecting what's yours. He was lucid, Brandon insisted. He wanted us to have a fresh start with the business. There's a developer interested in the land. A developer for a luxury housing community, Melissa explained, her eyes bright with the prospect of money. They'll pay $7 million. Mom, we can all start fresh. Fresh. As if the life Nicholas and I had built was something stale, something to be discarded. As if the legacy of Canton family orchards, our sustainable farming practices, our refusal to sell to big grocery chains that would squeeze our workers, our annual donation of 10% of our crop to local food banks, was nothing compared to the prospect of cookie-cutter homes for wealthy weekenders from Philadelphia. Your father would never sell this land for development, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And I didn't sign anything. You don't need to, Brandon explained with practiced patience. The business was in Dad's name. The house, too. Pennsylvania isn't a community property state. I knew then that they had planned this. Not just after Nicholas fell ill, but perhaps even before. How long had my son been waiting for his father to die so he could liquidate our life's work? How many times had Melissa called, not to check on Nicholas's health, but to ensure their plan was still in motion? I need time, I said, standing up. I'm going to bed. We'll discuss this tomorrow. But there would be no discussion. While I lay awake in the bed I'd shared with Nicholas, staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar creaks of our old farmhouse, my children were making their final preparations. Morning came with the smell of coffee, the expensive kind Brandon had brought from Boston because our local store brand was undrinkable. I dressed slowly, my joints stiff with grief and age, and the cold knowledge of what my children had become. When I came downstairs, they were waiting with a small suitcase I didn't recognize. We packed some essentials for you, Melissa said brightly. Brandon and I thought we'd drive you to look at Sunny Pines today. It's a beautiful retirement community just 2 hours from here. I'm not going to any retirement community, I replied, pouring myself coffee. This is my home. Mom, be reasonable. Brandon sighed. The paperwork is done. We close with the developers next week. You can't stay here. I looked at my son then, truly looked at him, and saw nothing of Nicholas in his face. Nothing of the boy who had once followed his father through the orchard at dawn, asking endless questions about pollination and pruning. Nothing but a stranger who saw me as an inconvenience to be managed. I need my medication from the bathroom, I said quietly. And I'd like to take some photos. Sure, Mom, Melissa agreed, relief evident in her voice. Take whatever personal items you want. We can send the rest later. I moved through my home one last time, my fingers tracing the worn banister Nicholas had sanded and revarnished every 5 years. The quilt my grandmother had made, draped across our bed. The window seat where I'd read stories to my children on rainy afternoons. In the bathroom, I retrieved my medications, but also slipped my passport and birth certificate from the hidden compartment in the medicine cabinet, the one Nicholas had built when we first worried about burglaries in the late 80s. In our bedroom closet, behind Nicholas's collection of flannel shirts that still smelled faintly of him, I retrieved the small fireproof box containing the one thing my children didn't know about. When I came downstairs, my purse felt heavier, but my heart was lighter with resolve. Brandon was checking his watch. Ready? He asked. Not really a question. I nodded, allowing Melissa to take my arm as if I were already the infirm old woman they wanted me to be. We drove in Brandon's rental car, a sleek black SUV with leather seats that stuck to the backs of my legs. I watched my home disappear through the rear window, memorizing the sight of spring buds on the apple trees, the weathered red of our barn, the stone chimney Nicholas had rebuilt the summer before Brandon was born. We drove past Millfield's small downtown, past the elementary school where I'd volunteered, past the community center where I still taught quilting on Wednesday evenings. But instead of continuing on the highway toward the larger towns where retirement communities clustered, Brandon turned onto County Road 27, a rural route that cut through farmland before eventually connecting to the interstate. 20 minutes later, he pulled onto the shoulder beside an empty field. The engine idled as he turned to look at me. This is where you get off, Mom, he said, his voice eerily calm. The house and business are mine now. What? Melissa at least had the decency to look confused. Brandon, what are you doing? What we discussed, he snapped. Mom's not going to make this easy. She'll contest the will, make scenes, embarrass us with the developer. This is cleaner. She has her medication, some clothes. There's a gas station about 5 miles up. She can call one of her quilting friends. He reached across me to open my door. Get out, Mom. I looked at my son, searching for any sign of the child I'd loved, and found nothing. Then I turned to my daughter, whose wide eyes darted between us, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Melissa? I asked, but I already knew she'd go along with him. She always had. I'm sorry, Mom, she whispered. It's just, we need this money. I have debts. I nodded once, gathered my purse and the small suitcase they'd packed, and stepped out onto the gravel shoulder. The spring air was cool, scented with fresh earth and the promise of rain later. I stood there, clutching my bag, as Brandon drove away without looking back. Melissa's pale face was visible through the rear window until they crested a hill and disappeared. No phone. No money. Or so they thought. Just my name and what they didn't know I still owned. And that's when I realized I wasn't alone. I was free. Free from pretending these people deserved my love simply because I'd given them life. Free from the weight of maternal obligation to children who saw me as nothing but an obstacle. I started walking, not toward the gas station Brandon had mentioned, but toward a future they couldn't imagine. In my purse was my passport, my medication, and a deed. The original deed to 20 acres of land in my maiden name, purchased before I married Nicholas, before Canton Family Orchards expanded. The most profitable 20 acres, as it happened, which included water rights that any developer would need. My children thought they'd left me with nothing. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The walk to town took nearly 2 hours. My shoes, sensible flats I'd worn for my husband's funeral, weren't made for country roads. By the time I reached Miller's Gas and Grocery at the edge of Millfield, my feet were blistered and the afternoon sun had burned my neck. I didn't care. Pain has a way of clarifying things. And with each step, my purpose had crystallized. I didn't go inside immediately. Instead, I sat on the bench outside, watching pickups and sedans come and go. Normal people living normal lives who had no idea that Naomi Canton, who judged their apple pies at the county fair for 20 years, had just been abandoned like roadkill by her own children. Mrs. Canton? I looked up to see Ray Miller himself, third-generation owner of the store, wiping his hands on his apron. You all right? You're looking a bit peaked. Just resting, Ray. Been a long day. He nodded, glancing at my suitcase. Real sorry about Nicholas. He was a good man. Yes, he was. I straightened my spine. Ray, could I use your phone? I seem to have forgotten mine. Of course you can. He led me inside past the beer coolers and snack aisles to the small office behind the counter. Take your time. I didn't call any of my quilting friends, as Brandon had suggested. I called Vincent Hargrove, our family lawyer of 30 years. Naomi, I tried reaching you yesterday. I was surprised not to see you at the reading. My hand tightened on the receiver. What reading? Vincent was silent for a moment. The will reading. Your son presented a document, but I had concerns. I've been trying to contact you. I've been indisposed, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Vincent, I need your help, and I need discretion. You have both. My office. 1 hour. I'll be there. I bought a cheap prepaid phone with cash I kept hidden in a compartment of my purse, emergency money Nicholas had insisted we both carry after getting stranded with a flat tire years ago. I also purchased a bottle of water and a sandwich I had no appetite for. Ray refused to take my money. Naomi, you need anything else? You just ask. His kindness nearly broke me. Nearly. But I hadn't cried when they lowered Nicholas into the ground, and I wouldn't cry now. Vincent's law office occupied the second floor of a Victorian on Main Street. When his secretary saw me, her eyes widened. Mrs. Canton, Mr. Hargrove is expecting you. She hurried from behind her desk. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee? I'm fine, Helen. Thank you. Vincent met me at his office door. His tall frame stooped with age, but his eyes were sharp as ever. He'd been a year behind Nicholas in school, had handled our business incorporation, our wills, everything legal in our lives. Naomi. He guided me to a leather chair, then sat not behind his desk, but in the chair beside me. Tell me what's happening. So I did. The conversation after the funeral, the suspicious will, the drive, and the abandonment. With each detail, Vincent's expression darkened. The will they showed you, he said when I finished, was not the will Nicholas and I prepared last year. Their document is a forgery. I suspected as much. I opened my purse and removed the fireproof box. From it, I withdrew the deed to the original 20 acres. They don't know about this. Vincent examined the deed, nodding slowly. Smart. Very smart. You two were always thinking ahead. Nicholas suggested putting this portion in my maiden name when we first expanded. Insurance, he called it, in case the business ever failed. I looked at the deed. And now it's insurance of another kind. Vincent placed the deed carefully on his desk. What do you want to do, Naomi? I met his eyes. I want my home back. I want the business my husband built, and I want my children to understand exactly what they've done. Vincent didn't flinch at the coldness in my voice. Instead, he nodded. Let's start with a place for you to stay tonight. My sister's B&B has a vacancy. Tomorrow, we'll begin the legal work. No. I shook my head. I need to move faster than that. The developer is closing next week. Understanding dawned in Vincent's eyes. You're not planning to just go through the courts. Courts are for people with time. Vincent, I have a better idea. That night, in the floral-papered comfort of Rose Hill bed and breakfast, I made my first call. Not to my children. They could wonder where I was, whether I'd reached town or collapsed on the roadside. My call was to Harold Winters, the regional manager of Pennsylvania Trust Bank, where Canton Family Orchards had done business for decades. Mrs. Canton, I'm so sorry about your husband. Thank you, Harold. I'm calling because I've discovered some concerning transactions, and I need your help to protect what's left of our business. My second call was to Martin Adams, the agricultural extension agent who'd worked with us for 15 years. Naomi, I was at the funeral but didn't get to speak with you. I know, Martin, it's been chaotic. Listen, I need information about a potential development on farmland in the county. My third call was to Sophia Delaney, editor of the Millfield Gazette and Nicholas's second cousin. Ellie, how are you holding up? I've been worried. I'm managing Sophia, but I think there's a story you might be interested in. About developers, protected agricultural land, and inheritance fraud. By midnight, I had made 7 calls. Each one a strand in the web I was weaving. Outside my window, the quiet streets of Millfield slept peacefully, unaware that Naomi Canton, always the peacemaker, always the nurturer, was planning war. In the morning, I met Vincent at his office with a legal pad full of notes. I need you to freeze the business accounts, I told him, and I need you to file an emergency injunction on any sale of the property based on the fraudulent will. Vincent reviewed my notes, his eyebrows rising. This is comprehensive. I had 40 years with Nicholas. I know every contract, every client, every detail of that business. I leaned forward. And I'm going to use all of it. Your children won't take this quietly. I'm counting on it. By noon, the pieces were in motion. Vincent had filed the emergency injunction. Harold had frozen the business accounts pending investigation of suspicious activity. Martin had contacted the Environmental Board about protected wetlands on the proposed development site, wetlands that happened to be on my 20 acres. I sat in Vincent's office, watching the clock tick toward 1 p.m., when my children would discover that their carefully constructed plan had hit its first obstacle. My phone rang, the new prepaid one whose number they shouldn't have known. But Vincent had made sure they'd gotten it. I let it ring 4 times before answering, my voice calm. This is Naomi. Mom. Brandon's voice crackled with barely contained fury. What have you done? I smiled, though he couldn't see it. I've only just begun. Mom, be reasonable. Brandon's voice hardened through the phone. You can't just freeze accounts and file injunctions. Do you have any idea what you're doing to our deal? Your deal. I corrected. Not mine, not your father's. Where are you? Melissa cut in, her voice shrill. Brandon had clearly put me on speaker. We've been worried sick. The lie hung between us like a poison cloud. They hadn't called the police, hadn't contacted friends. They'd been too busy finalizing their betrayal. Worried that I survived? I asked, my voice perfectly level. Worried that I didn't conveniently disappear? That's not fair. Melissa whined. Brandon made a mistake. Shut up, Melissa. Brandon snapped. I smiled into the phone. Already fracturing. Listen carefully. I'm giving you one chance to walk away with something. Withdraw your fraudulent will. Sign the business and house back to me. In return, I'll give you each a one-time payment of $50,000. After that, we're done. Brandon laughed. An ugly sound. You're delusional. You have nothing. The will is legal. The will is a forgery, Vincent interjected, leaning toward the speakerphone on his desk. As the lawyer who drafted Nicholas Canton's actual will, I can testify to that. Silence stretched across the line. You have 24 hours, I said. After that, the offer expires and I proceed with fraud charges. I hung up before they could respond. Vincent leaned back in his chair. You realize they'll probably refuse. I'm counting on it. I stood, gathering my purse. Now I need to visit the bank in person. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and quiet meetings in back offices throughout Millfield. People who had known me for decades, known us, Nicholas and me, stepped up with information, signatures, and support. Not out of pity, but out of respect, and perhaps a touch of relish at seeing the Canton children, who had abandoned their hometown for shinier places, get their comeuppance. By evening, I'd moved into a small apartment above Lucille's bakery. The owner, Lucille Brennan, had been my friend since our children started kindergarten together. Stay as long as you need, she said, pressing the key into my palm. That boy of yours never did right by this town, or by you and Nicholas. I slept surprisingly well that night, lulled by the familiar smells of bread and pastry rising from below. In the morning, I dressed in clothes Lucille had lent me, a pair of jeans and a sweater that fit well enough, and prepared for war. At precisely 9 a.m., when the deed office opened, I filed paperwork asserting my ownership of the original 20 acres, property that included the main house, the barn, and most critically, the water access that any developer would need. At 10 a.m., I met with the Agricultural Board about conservation easements Nicholas and I had quietly put in place years ago, restrictions that would make development nearly impossible, even if Brandon somehow managed to sell. At noon, I sat with Sophia in the Millfield Gazette office, providing documentation for a story headlined, "Local Orchard at Center of Inheritance Dispute. Developer Plans Threaten Protected Agricultural Land." By 2 p.m., my phone was ringing again. "The offer's off the table," I said by way of greeting. "Mom, you're making a terrible mistake." Brandon's voice had lost its edge of superiority, replaced by something closer to panic. "The developer's lawyers are threatening to sue if we can't deliver as promised." "That sounds like your problem." "Our problem." Melissa broke in. "Mom, please. I used the advance to pay off some debts. If this falls through, I'll be ruined. You should have thought of that before leaving me on the side of the road." "That was Brandon's idea," she cried. "I didn't know until we were already driving. The betrayal between them gave me no satisfaction." "Nothing about this gave me satisfaction, only a cold, necessary sense of justice being served. The bank statements show you withdrew $50,000 3 days before your father's funeral, Melissa." I kept my voice clinical, detached. "Planning your fresh start already, were you?" She began to sob, dramatic, heaving cries I'd heard countless times when she didn't get her way. "It's too late for tears," I continued. "Vincent will send over the paperwork. You both sign, renouncing all claims to Canton Family Orchards and the house. In return, I won't press charges for fraud, attempted elder abuse, and theft." "And the $50,000? Brandon asked, his businessman's mind still calculating. "That offer expired," I replied. "You get to stay out of jail. That's all." I hung up, set down the phone, and stared out the window of Vincent's office at the town where I'd spent my entire adult life. Across the street, the farmers' market was setting up, just as it did every Thursday. People moved about their business, greeting neighbors, examining produce, living normal lives where children didn't abandon mothers on roadsides. "They'll fight," Vincent said, setting a cup of tea beside me. "Let them." I didn't touch the tea. "I have one more call to make." I dialed a number I'd memorized decades ago, but rarely used. "Robert, it's Naomi Canton. I think it's time I called in that favor." Robert Wilson had been Nicholas's roommate at Penn State before either of them met me. They'd remained friends even after Robert moved to Philadelphia to start what would become one of the largest real estate law firms in the state. 30 years ago, Nicholas had loaned Robert money when his first firm collapsed, money that helped rebuild a practice now known for destroying predatory developers. "Naomi." His voice was warm with recognition. "I've been meaning to call since I heard about Nicholas." "I'm so sorry." "Thank you, Robert. I need your help with this situation." I explained everything. The forgery, the abandonment, the developer. Robert listened without interruption. And when I finished, the silence stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "I'll be in Millfield tomorrow morning," he finally said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "These developers, platinum makers, they've been on our radar. Naomi, what they're planning violates at least 6 environmental regulations. We've been looking for a way to stop them, and now you have one." There was a shuffling of papers. "Don't sign anything before I get there. And Naomi, I'm sorry about your children." "I stopped having children 3 days ago," I replied. "Now I just have adversaries." That night, I sat in Lucille's kitchen as she closed the bakery, drinking tea and watching her prepare dough for the morning. "You should try to eat something," she said, nodding toward the sandwich she'd made me. "You need your strength." "I'm not hungry." I hadn't had an appetite since Nicholas died. Food was fuel now, nothing more. "Heard Melissa's staying at the Millfield Inn," Lucille said, kneading with practiced movements. "Brandon's still at the house." "People are talking. Let them talk." The small-town grapevine had always annoyed my children, but now it served me. Every move they made, I knew about it within hours. "Sophia's article runs tomorrow," Lucille continued. "Front page. Got a call from the Philadelphia Inquirer, too. They want to pick up the story. Something about the developer having trouble with other projects." I nodded, unsurprised. Robert's call had confirmed what I'd suspected. Platinum Acres had a pattern of targeting vulnerable landowners, particularly the elderly, with promises they never intended to keep. Did I do the right thing, raising them the way we did? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Not sentimentality, but a genuine curiosity about where I had failed. Lucille's hands stilled in the dough. You and Nicholas were good parents, Ellie. Some people just turn out rotten no matter the soil they're planted in. I accepted her answer with a nod, pushing away the useless question. It didn't matter anymore. The past was buried with Nicholas. Only the future and my revenge remained. Morning brought Robert Wilson, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than 3 months of Canton Orchard profits, striding into Vincent's office with 2 associates trailing behind him. Naomi, he embraced me briefly, then immediately turned to business. We filed injunctions against Platinum Acres in 3 counties already. Now we add yours to the list. For the next 2 hours, I watched a master at work. Robert didn't just understand law, he wielded it like a scalpel. Precise and devastating. By noon, he had drafted documents that would not only block the sale, but potentially trigger a state investigation into the developer. Your children's signatures, he said, sliding papers across Vincent's desk. We need them to officially renounce their claims based on the fraudulent will. Vincent says they're refusing. They'll sign, I said with certainty. They just need the proper motivation. I pulled out my phone and made another call. This one to Thomas Winters, Harold's son, and the assistant district attorney for the county. Thomas, it's Naomi Canton. I'd like to discuss pressing criminal charges. Robert raised an eyebrow, but said nothing as I arranged a meeting for later that afternoon. When I hung up, he nodded approvingly. You always were tougher than Nicholas gave you credit for. Nicholas knew exactly how tough I was, I corrected. He just never thought I'd need to use it against our own children. Just after 2 p.m., my phone rang again. Brandon, his voice clipped and formal. We'll sign the papers, but we want something in writing saying you won't pursue charges. I already offered that yesterday. The terms have changed. What do you want? He sounded defeated, which gave me no pleasure. Be at Vincent's office at 4 p.m. Bring Melissa. I'll lay out my terms then. When they arrived, I was already seated between Robert and Vincent, a united front of legal firepower. My children looked terrible. Brandon unshaven, his expensive shirt wrinkled. Melissa with smeared makeup and hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. Neither could meet my eyes. Sit, I said, gesturing to the chairs across from us. This won't take long. Robert slid the documents across the table. Mrs. Canton has agreed not to pursue criminal charges for the forged will, fraud, elder abuse, and attempted theft of business assets worth approximately $12 million. In exchange, you will both sign these papers acknowledging the will was fraudulent, renouncing all claims to Canton Family Orchards, the residential property, and all associated assets. Brandon skimmed the document, his face paling. This says we forfeit our inheritance entirely. Yes, I said simply. But that's, Melissa began. Exactly what you tried to do to me, I finished for her. With one difference. I'm offering you a legal way out, not abandonment on a roadside. Mom, please. Melissa's voice cracked. I know we made a terrible mistake, but stop. I held up my hand. This isn't a negotiation. Sign, or I walk across the street to the DA's office and file charges. Thomas Winters is waiting for my call. At the mention of the assistant district attorney, Brandon's already pale face went ashen. He knew Thomas from high school. Another local boy he'd looked down on who had now surpassed him. You'd really do that? Send your own children to jail. There was genuine disbelief in his voice, as if the woman who had made his favorite cookies and bandaged his childhood scrapes couldn't possibly be this cold, this unforgiving. The woman who would have forgiven you anything died on County Road 27, I replied evenly. You left her in the dust. Brandon looked away first, then reached for the pen Vincent offered. His signature was shaky but legible. Melissa took longer, tears dropping onto the paper as she signed her name. What happens now? She asked in a small voice. Now you leave Millfield, I said, gathering the signed documents. Both of you today. If I see either of you in this town again, I will press charges regardless of what you've signed. And the developer? Brandon asked, a last attempt at salvaging something. Robert smiled thinly. Platinum Acres will be formally notified that the property is not and was never for sale. They'll also be receiving notification of our intent to file suit for their part in what appears to be a conspiracy to defraud a widow. They left without another word, shoulders slumped in defeat. I watched through Vincent's window as they walked separately to their cars, Brandon to his rental, Melissa to her flashy red convertible that Nicholas had helped her buy last year. Neither looked back at the office. Neither looked at each other. It's done, Vincent said quietly, placing the documents in his safe. But it wasn't done. Not yet. The legal battle was won, but the war, my war, had one final act. I need a ride, I told Robert. Where to? Home. The Canton farmhouse looked exactly as I'd left it 4 days earlier. White clapboard siding glowing in the late afternoon sun. Nicholas's rocking chair still on the front porch where he'd spent his last mobile days watching the orchard bloom. Only Brandon's rental car in the driveway marked any change. Want me to come in with you? Robert asked as he pulled up behind it. No, this part won't do alone. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. I moved through the first floor, noting small disturbances. Brandon's laptop on the dining table, a half-empty whiskey glass beside it, muddy shoes by the door that he would never have left there when he lived here. Brandon, I called out, my voice echoing through the rooms that had witnessed 40 years of my life. No answer. I climbed the stairs, my hand trailing along the banister Nicholas had carved by hand our first year in the house. At the top, I noticed our bedroom door ajar, light spilling into the hallway. I pushed it open. Brandon stood by the window, staring out at the orchard, his back to me. The room had been ransacked, dresser drawers pulled out, closet doors open, Nicholas's possessions scattered across the bed we'd shared for 4 decades. Looking for something? I asked coldly. He didn't startle. Didn't turn around. I know there has to be more. Dad wouldn't leave everything to you. Your father trusted me. Something you clearly never learned to do. Now he did turn, his face twisted with something between rage and desperation. You've destroyed everything. The deal's collapsed. Melissa's creditors are calling. My firm is investigating why I took so much time off without explanation. Actions have consequences, I replied simply. Is that what this is? A lesson. He laughed bitterly. Not a lesson, I corrected. Justice. I moved to the bookshelf and pulled out an old leather-bound copy of Walden, Nicholas's favorite book, the one he'd read aloud to me during long winter evenings when the children were asleep. From between its pages, I withdrew a sealed envelope. Your father wrote this for you the week before he died. I was going to give it to you after the funeral, before I understood what you really were. Brandon reached for it, but I held it back. Did you even grieve for him, or were you too busy planning how to profit from his death? Something flashed across his face. Perhaps shame. Perhaps just annoyance at being caught. I loved Dad. You loved what he provided, I corrected. Security. Status. The safety net for your riskier ventures. What was it this time, Brandon? Another bad investment? Gambling debts? His silence was answer enough. Your father built something that would have sustained generations if you'd had the patience to nurture it. I placed the envelope on the dresser. Instead, you tried to sell it for quick cash. The orchard business is dying, he snapped. Dad was too stubborn to see it, too tied to outdated ways. The development would have made you rich, while destroying everything your father valued. Everything I valued. You could have had a comfortable retirement, a condo in Florida. No worries, except the worry of living with the knowledge that I'd allowed my husband's legacy to be bulldozed for vacation homes. Brandon shook his head as if I were the one being unreasonable. Even now, he couldn't understand. Take the letter and go, I said. Read it or don't. But either way, this is the last time you'll set foot in this house. He snatched the envelope and pushed past me without another word. I listened to his footsteps on the stairs, the slam of the front door, the engine of his rental car roaring to life. Only when the sound had faded completely did I allow myself to sit on the edge of the bed, surrounded by the wreckage of Brandon's final violation. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried since that moment on County Road 27 when I realized my children had become strangers. Instead, I began to put the room back in order, folding Nicholas's flannel shirts that still smelled faintly of him, gathering scattered photographs, restoring order to the chaos my son had left behind. As darkness fell, I moved to the kitchen and made a cup of tea, carrying it to the front porch, where I settled into Nicholas's rocking chair. Above me, stars began to emerge in the clear spring sky. Below, the orchard stretched into darkness. The trees we'd planted together now mature and strong. My phone rang. Vincent checking on me. I'm home, I told him. Brandon's gone. And you're all right there alone? I've been alone since Nicholas died, I replied. The difference is now I know it. 3 months later, I sat in the same chair, watching the summer sun set over an orchard heavy with ripening fruit. The harvest would be good this year, perhaps our best ever. Not that I would handle it alone. The new manager I'd hired, Martin Adams's daughter, Lisa, had already proven herself more than capable. My phone chimed with a text from Lucille. Front page again. Thought you'd want to see. The attached image showed the Philadelphia Inquirer's business section, Platinum Acres CEO indicted in fraud scheme. The subheading mentioned Canton Family Orchards as the case that had triggered the investigation, ultimately revealing a pattern of elder exploitation spanning 3 states. I set the phone aside, feeling nothing but a quiet satisfaction. Justice, not revenge. Perhaps they were the same thing after all. Another text arrived. This one from an unknown number. Mom, please. It's been months. Can we talk? Melissa. I deleted it without replying, just as I deleted the 12 before it. She had begun reaching out after the scandal broke, after her creditors took her car, her condo, everything she owned to cover debts she'd accumulated, expecting the windfall from the orchard sale. Brandon never contacted me at all. Though Vincent heard he'd been asked to resign from his firm when his connection to the fraud investigation came to light. My children were learning the hardest lesson: some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness. As darkness settled over the orchard, I rocked gently, listening to the night sounds. Crickets chirping, a distant owl, the creak of the chair against weathered boards. In my lap lay a notebook where I'd begun sketching plans for Canton Family Orchard's future, a farm-to-table restaurant in the old barn, educational programs for local schools, expansion of our organic practices. Nicholas would have loved these ideas. We discussed similar dreams before his illness consumed our conversations with treatments and pain management. I'm doing it, Nicholas, I whispered to the night air. Everything we planned, everything they tried to destroy. Tomorrow I would meet with the lawyer handling the formation of the Nicholas Canton Agricultural Scholarship, a fund for local students pursuing sustainable farming, funded by the profits my children had tried to steal. Next week, I would host the first community harvest dinner, inviting the neighbors and friends who had rallied around me when I needed them most. And in the quiet evenings, I would sit here in Nicholas's chair, watching over the orchard we had built. The legacy that would continue without our children. Strong and enduring as the trees themselves. Not alone after all. Just free. That's my story. Some of you might judge me harsh, unforgiving. Some might call it cruelty to cut off my own flesh and blood so completely. But remember what I told you at the beginning. Betrayal from those you've carried in your heart is a wound that transforms you. It burns away sentimentality and leaves something harder, clearer in its place. My children made their choice that day on County Road 27. I made mine every day after.